On this earth, there are dark stories abound, and one of them is the tale of the most brutal executions recorded in history. Each method used forces the criminals to confront torment before their death. Today, Just a Story will take you to explore just how horrifying the tools used for executions in the past could be. Throughout the ages, there have been countless execution methods, many of which are truly unimaginable. It's hard to believe that anyone could come up with such cruel and barbaric ways to treat another human being. However, in the past, the world was filled with criminals, and in order to deter crime and set an example, authorities resorted to brutal methods of execution. Whether it was due to the twisted minds of those in power or a genuine desire to prevent crime, these methods were designed to make criminals think twice before committing a crime, for fear of facing such a gruesome fate. The first method is the brazen bull. This was essentially roasting someone alive. This torture device was designed by Perillos, a craftsman from Athens around 570 BC, as a gift for Phalaris, the ruler of Acragas in Sicily, who was said to take delight in torturing people like vegetables. One day, he ordered his designers to create a torture device that would give him ultimate pleasure, promising a great reward if they succeeded. Perillos did not design it because he was a sadist, but because he knew his life would certainly end if he did not, as this ruler was so cruel. Once finished, he presented it to the king, who was puzzled upon seeing it. But Perillos explained that this brass bull sculpture could be opened on the side, allowing prisoners or the king's enemies to be stuffed inside, then the fire beneath it would be lit, turning it into a mini inferno. The agony of torture lies in the fact that the heat circulated within the brass body remained trapped, causing the person inside to slowly roast and squirm in agony, as the heat steadily increased with no means of escape. Moreover, Perillos designed it in a way that the cries of the tortured person inside would resonate through the bull's nose and mouth like the mooing of a cow. Upon hearing this, Phalaris immediately ordered his soldiers to seize Perillos and stuff him inside to test it out, which the king enjoyed immensely. This king was truly wicked. Many people may struggle to imagine just how much torment they would endure if they were subjected to it themselves. Think about it, even being touched by candle tears can cause you to flinch. Now, imagine something as severe as being burned alive until every last breath is extinguished. It's another form of execution that no convict would ever want to face. Moving on to the second method, rat torture, this was another execution that used small, sharp-clawed animals to determine a prisoner's fate. It starts by restraining the criminal on a torture rack, tying their limbs so they can't move. Then, a small rat is placed on their stomach and covered with a small cage made of brass or copper, preventing any escape routes. The cage is secured tightly with wet leather. The cage would then be gradually heated until the rat, feeling the increasing heat, would try to escape by burrowing. And the only way out was to burrow into the defenseless prisoner's stomach. Using its teeth and claws, the rat would burrow into the prisoner's abdomen, shredding their flesh, puncturing their intestines which would spill out, all while the heated cage seared their skin. If the criminal is still alive, they must consider themselves incredibly unlucky because the rat would continue to feast on their entrails while they still breathe. Just the thought of it is horrifying. Rat torture was first used in the 17th century in the Netherlands, and in the 20th century, it was employed by military dictatorships in various locations in South America. The third method is impalement, which is considered one of the most brutal executions, conceived around 1800 BC during the time of King Hammurabi of Babylonia. However, it became widely known in the 15th century when Vlad III of Wallachia, also known as Vlad the Impaler, used it to torment criminals and his enemies. The infamous character Dracula was inspired by Vlad Tepes Dracula, combining Vlad's cruelty with the devil lore, creating the figure of Count Dracula that we are familiar with. Vlad the Impaler employed this method to torment criminals and his enemies, with estimates suggesting tens of thousands of people were impaled. The process was simple yet horrifying. Sharp stakes or iron spikes were driven into the ground. And after tying the hands of the convict, they were impaled through the rectum if male or through the genitals if female, then lifted onto the stake. The pointed end of the stake would protrude from either the mouth or the chest, gradually tearing apart internal organs, inflicting excruciating pain and torment until eventual death. Some individuals endured this agony for up to 8 days before succumbing. Though simple, you can imagine the devastation of having most internal organs perforated and destroyed in this way. The creator must have been extremely deranged to devise this horror. The fourth execution method is Ling Chi, known as the most brutal in Chinese history. Ling Chi is literally translated as slow slicing or death by 1,000 cuts. Records show Ling Chi was used as early as the Tang dynasty around the 7th century AD, and spread to neighboring territories like Korea and Vietnam. It began with parading the condemned prisoner to the execution grounds, then tying them to a pole or post. When the executioner was ready, he would begin slicing the prisoner's body bit by bit with a knife, cutting away piece by piece. The key goal of Ling Chi was to prolong the prisoner's death for as long as possible. If you think being sliced up like this would lead to swift death from unbearable pain, the executioners had methods to keep the prisoner alive longer. They would have the prisoner consume opium to dull their nerves and pain sensations so they could linger in agony. They would start by flaying the skin and flesh from the body until only bones remained. The next step was severing all vital organs and limbs of the hands, arms, feet, and legs before finally beheading the convict and pulling out their heart. The reason for such comprehensive bodily mutilation was because the ancient Chinese believed it would prevent the soul from being reincarnated, according to Confucian beliefs that the human body is a sacred gift from one's ancestors. Thus, to die missing any of the bodies meant suffering torment in the afterlife for eternity, tortured in life. Then as a spirit. This punishment was reserved for those guilty of the most serious crimes like attempted regicide, rebelling against the empire, or killing one's parents or elders. For this reason, the Chinese saw Ling Chi as a fitting retribution aligned with the crimes committed. Ling Chi was last carried out in 1905 before being abolished, with the unfortunate final victim being a Mongolian prince's servant who had murdered his master. Finally, the last method for today is scaphism, a Persian punishment that did not inflict sudden bodily pain, but prolonged agony using simple elements like honey and milk. The victim would be stripped naked and tightly bound to a small boat or tree trunk. They would then have milk and honey forced into their mouth until severe diarrhea set in. Honey would also be poured over the victim's body, focusing on the ears, eyes, face, genitals, and anus. The true horror began after this. As the victim suffered uncontrollable defecation, they would eventually be lying in a pool of their own excrement and vomit. At this stage, worms and insects of all kinds would descend in droves, ants coming for the milk and honey, rats nibbling on the incapacitated victim, flies feeding on the feces and vomit before laying eggs all over the body. These would hatch into maggots that burrowed through the flesh, causing further infection and inflammation. The prisoner would slowly watch parts of themselves be consumed by worms, rats gnawing them, and ants biting away until inevitable death by sepsis. Scaphism was typically reserved for severe crimes against the state like murder or rebelling against the king during the Persian Empire in the 5th century BC. That's an overview of some of the most brutal execution methods from history. This is just an example. There are many more bizarre and cruel methods that if you are interested, just tell me and I will tell you about them. In the present era, if these executions continue, crime rates will decrease or disappear altogether, because no one wanted to meet death in such a tortured way. Or what do you all think? Feel free to express your opinion. And don't forget to follow and enable notifications, so you don't miss any of our other storytelling videos. Until next time, goodbye.